People who knew murderers, when did you know something was off? Obligatory didn't know him as a friend, but a regular customer in my shop. He would come in after his shift to buy beer and tobacco. On one occasion he caught and helped us to evict a shoplifter. He seemed friendly enough. Then a local girl went missing and was eventually pulled out of a river a few weeks later. They announced they were looking for somebody in connection with her death, and it was him. They had CCTV footage of him tailing her through a park and footage of him buying beer in a shop, still unconfirmed to this day, being our shop, as they blurred out the surroundings. Anyway, as we had a TV in our shop switched to the news channel as it was a rolling story local to us, we started to discuss the guy, if we saw him on the day she went missing, that kind of thing. We hadn't, but it was at that point when one of my staff, a young girl, who had previously said to management that she didn't want to work the closing shift anymore because there was too many creepy men around, told us that he used to stare at her when he came into the store in a way that made her uncomfortable enough to not want to be on the floor when he came in. They never got to question him about the murder, as he was found dead in a local park a few days later. He'd hung himself. Alice Gross? I remember that case. Terrible, terrible circumstances. The killer was already a convicted murderer in Latvia, if I remember correctly. It was huge news locally, the biggest manhunt in London since 7/7. That poor girl was so tragically young and vulnerable. I worked at a box store about 20 years ago. A guy I worked with was always off, and would give away pocket knives to other employees. One day he came in with scratches all over his face. He had raped and murdered a disabled girl the day before, using a pocket knife he had given our co-worker later that day. Edit, in prison until 2051. Friend of the family's always had a thing about taking pocket knives as a gift. A superstition about how it was bad luck and would result in the knife somehow ending up in your back, metaphorically speaking. Turns out it was good advice in this instance. If he gave away that murder weapon, I wonder if the other knives he gave away were also used in crimes. I moved to a new town when I was 19 and was making new friends at my new job. I met this girl at work and she invited me over to hang out with her and her best friend. I went and the best friend's boyfriend was there and the vibes were way off. I was uncomfortable. He was cold, and just seemed angry for no reason. They had mentioned to me before he got there that he was always controlling and had hit the girl before. Turns out controlling was an understatement. She came home one day and he was digging a hole in the backyard and she asked what he was doing and he replied, "Digging your grave." He hit her, said if he can't have her, nobody could have her, all of that. So eventually she left him and had to get a restraining order and everything. He somehow persuaded her to get in a car with him on her work break and they went missing for a few days. Turns out he stabbed her to death, threw her in a river and killed himself. I met the girl only a few times and him only the once, but the face that I was in such close proximity to someone capable of that gives me chills. She was so young, it was really sad. Unfortunately, the stats on women being murdered by their intimate partners are pretty grim. This is just one of many cases. The murderer I know was more of an acquaintance or casual friend. He lived down the hall from me and we hung out sometimes, but not like just the two of us. Still, we'd chill at each other's place regularly. I passed him one day in the stairwell and I said hi. He said hi back but called me by the wrong name. He was really distracted and kind of awkward. He didn't make eye contact and kept moving. I remember thinking maybe we don't know each other as well as I thought. Later he was playing Nintendo, yep, my N64, this was a while ago, with my roommate when I came home. He apologized and said his mind was elsewhere. A couple days later there are cops all over the building, interviewing people and searching his place. They'd found the guy's roommate with a bullet in the back of his head in an abandoned lot across town. The next day he confessed. Holy shit, did they ever find out why he did it? Who the hell gave this a wholesome award? I went through primary and high school with a guy in the year below me who seemed a little distant. We lived near each other and caught the bus from the same stop. He was a bit of a bully, but it was something more. Like, you could tell he wasn't a bully because he was hurting inside or because he felt threatened in some way. He was a bully because he did what he wanted to do and didn't realize that it hurt other people. Like the kind of kid who enjoyed pulling wings off flies. Not long after I left my hometown, I heard that he had been charged with the murder of a 2-year-old. Apparently his girlfriend at the time left her daughter with him for an hour or so while she ran an errand. He couldn't deal with the toddler crying anymore, so he beat her. He caused severe internal bleeding and she died in hospital not long after. He would have been around 22 when he did it. He was sentenced to 36 years with a non-parole period of 27 years. Edit: this happened in Australia around 2014. As a new dad, the best advice I received was to just walk away. Unconsolable kid, put in safe crib and give yourself a minute or 2. Or 5. Was this in Ottawa? If not, then sadly it sounds almost identical to a case back in the 80s. When he said there was a teenager, his mother and his stepfather lived around the corner from me. My mother knew them better than myself, but we all thought they were lovely. A couple of years ago the son went to the hospital several times asking for help. He claimed he had voices telling him to kill his stepfather, but each time he went he was released and told to come back. They were given appointment. A few weeks later, during a small argument, he stabbed his stepfather to death in the front garden. He turned himself in the next day, and wasn't convicted as he sought help before it happened. Instead, he got the treatment he needed. Edit: I see a lot of people wondering if it might have been a defense/planned murder. It wasn't. The way he was killed, and how the son acted after, removed any doubt. This is both really sad, that they kept turning him away, and also really good, that they didn't convict him. Smile. Did they tell the stepfather? Personally, I'd like to know if someone is having voices in their head telling them to kill me. I didn't. He was the sweetest, kindest, gentle giant kind of guy. Kind of a weirdo, but still a great guy overall. I remember once that he shed a tear just by talking about his kid, because he was so filled with emotion from having him in his life. He turned out to kill his wife, kidnap his child, start the longest Amber Alert in the history of Canada. As he tried escaping to a different province, he killed another man to steal his car. I'm still unsure today if I should have seen anything at any point. It comes to haunt my nightmares from time to time. I feel like I remember that story. Which provinces? What happened to the kid? My ex-co-worker was always a huge dick who nobody liked to work with. He'd always be on his phone and talking to someone, even when he had a customer waiting to order in the drive-thru. The moment I knew he had something wrong with him was when I caught him looking for his dab pen in one of the lockers in the back room. He always used a top locker, but he was searching through one at the bottom, which happened to be my locker for the day. I told him that, so he just stared me in the face for a second, and walked away. Later that same year, I learned that he shot and killed someone at a gas station. Edit: to clarify, he was, most likely, trying to steal from me, and the fact that he made up his lie on the fly set me off, not to mention the creepy stare at the end. I was running a video game program for kids years ago, and one day an older, 19, teen came in. I didn't want to allow him in, but one of my co-workers had already said it was okay. The other kids were around 12 to 14 and he kept rubbing their shoulders and making them visibly uncomfortable. When I told him to stop, he did the same thing you described, just stared at me for a few seconds without saying anything. There was nothing in those eyes. I went home and told my boyfriend at the time that I'd met someone who would end up a rapist or murderer someday. He was dating the sister of one of the kids I worked with, and maybe a month after this, ended up breaking into their apartment, killing the boy with a sword, and kidnapping the sister who had broken things off with him. The murderer's mother ended up turning him in. Subscribe for more hot Reddit takes in your inbox, guaranteed.